I have 4 children. I've got one here. Oh no, maybe 2 here. Micah just left with intermediate. Sandro's over there. I'm a mum I have 3 boys and 1 girl at the end. I remember having my first son and I was like, oh, a boy, like, okay, cool. Yeah, boys are cool. I can do that. And then boy number 2 and I was like, okay, great. Boy number 3, I'm like, great, so this is really a thing. This is what's happening. And at that point that I had boy number 3, my eldest son, Sandro, was just really into sports. And Micah was kind of following suit. And there's a lot of sports that goes on in my house, and I kind of realized that if I actually want to be able to engage with my boys and be able to have conversation with them, I'm going to have to actually care about what they care about. So I'm going to have to learn about sports. Sandro didn't want me to just watch his soccer game. He wanted me to see every detail so that we could talk about it, for a week to, the next week. And so I've started getting into sports, and so I know all about rugby now, and I can do that. Yeah, rugby league, I've got that nailed. Yeah, I love rugby league, really into that. Warriors last night, gutted. But I kind of like the bunnies. I don't know why. I think it's because their colours remind me of Christmas, so I was okay with them winning, but rugby league, yeah, I've got that. Sorry, Dean. Cricket, I feel like I'm not giving that one a go. It just takes so long. So there's cricket. At the moment, I'm learning basketball because that's kind of like a new thing in my house, basketball, yeah. I was watching it the other day with Joel, and he got all excited. He was like, babe, do you want me to get you a basketball singlet? And I was like, okay, I'm not there yet, but, I'm learning. I'm getting there. So, learning about sports, learning about these things, because if I want to be able to, talk with my boys, talk with my husband about sports, I need to be able to know more about it. And we have people over to watch sports games at our house all of the time because we have Sky Sport, because it's very important. If you didn't know, very important. And then there's this one thing that everybody does when there's a game going on, and they come in, they go, what's the score? Who's winning? What's the score? Because there's this fascination between 2 sides wrestling it out. Who's going to win? What's the score? It's this big thing. I know Joel, when we're at weddings, he kind of has his phone under the reception table with a game on. And it's really funny to watch because you see some guys looking over and they're like, he's watching the game. And so then this funny thing happens. They all start walking past what's the score? And it becomes the secret thing. It's a big thing. What's the score? Who's winning? We love to talk about it. If there's a game on, 2 different teams, we love to talk about it. If there are a whole lot of individuals competing for an award or first place, we love to watch it. If there's in the court, if there's 2 sides battling together, it grabs our attention. But we all have this one battle, this one wrestle inside of us, one side versus another. We all have it, but I find it interesting that we almost never talk about it. See, all of us have a wrestle inside between right and wrong, between good and evil, between light and darkness. There is a wrestle that goes on within all of us. I was watching The Simpsons the other day, which is a little sacrilegious, but so funny. And I was watching it, and there's Homer Simpson, and he needed to support his family by doing this thing, but he just wanted to go down to Moe's bar and drink some beer with Lenny and Carl and Barney, And so he was really torn. Yeah, I do like it. And so then good conscience appears on Homer's left shoulder. And then bad conscience appears on his right shoulder, and you can see Homer's what to do, because he just wants beer. A slightly more holy example was Paul in the Bible, Apostle Paul. So he wrote most of the New Testament. He talked about this thorn in his side. This thorn in his side, which was most likely a character deficiency or something that would take him away from what God has for him. And he talks about this thorn in his side, and he would say these words. He would say, why is it I can't seem to do the good that I want to do, but I seem to do the bad that I don't want to do? He's talking about this wrestle that we all have inside of us. But the problem is when we don't talk about this wrestle and when we get so familiar with this wrestle inside between light and darkness, good and evil, is when we start to get so familiar with it, we lose sight on just how deeply it is affecting us in every area of our life. The problem with getting familiar with it is that we don't see just how it's affecting us. You know, the wrestle between good and evil, light and darkness, the things of God and the things that aren't of God, that wrestle can make us feel like we're a fraud. It can make us feel like we're a fraud, like I can't take that opportunity because if they only knew, like if they knew the thoughts that I had, if they knew what I did when nobody else was watching, if they knew my struggle, if they knew my deepest, darkest secret, if they knew that, they wouldn't be giving me this opportunity. This person wouldn't want to be sitting next to me. They wouldn't have me as a leader in church if they knew. And then it makes us feel like, I can't take this opportunity. This feeling of being a fraud, it makes us do either a few of these things, either put a wall up, it makes us shrink back, or it makes us overcompensate. None of those things are going to lead us into who God created us to be. You know, many of us can wrestle with the same darkness for year upon year upon year upon year. This is very common, but what it does is it wears us down. You know, you might be wrestling with just this feeling of needing to be successful in the eyes of others. And you don't want to feel that way, but you know there's that hunger for other people to see you as successful. And year after year, you struggle and wrestle with that feeling, with that thought. Or maybe it's wrestling with, you just want to have self-control so you can break this habit, but it's been wrestling, and year after year after year, it is still going on. What can happen is when this wrestle seems to just go on and on and on, it wears us out, and over time it causes us to ask these questions. Is this goodness in me greater than the darkness in me? Will this darkness in me ever be conquered? Will the God in me win the battle of my heart? It causes us to ask these questions. But one thing I know to be true is that we have a spiritual enemy. And there is a force at work that wants the sin in you to grow, and it wants the darkness in you to grow to the point that you are restricted and that you can't even see the light anymore. We have an enemy that is wanting to feed that darkness, and we have an enemy that wants you to think that you are the only person in this room with that struggle. But the reality is, if we all had an honest moment and stood up and shouted what our darkest secret is, I think we would actually feel encouraged. Because we're not so bad as we think we are. Our enemy wants us to think that we're alone in it, that there's something wrong with you for having this struggle. You know, and I empathize with you with the struggle, and I empathize with myself, because it is hard to be a Christian and put yourself out there when the thorn in your side is glaringly obvious to you. It's hard to step out and to want to share your spiritual gifts with others, or to share yourself with others when you know what you struggle with. And if they knew, they wouldn't want you to. Like, it's hard to put yourself out there, especially on the days where you don't even know what's going to win. You know, what side's going to win, who's going to win. You know, my natural disposition is quite positive. And, well, that's what I've been told anyway. It just kind of comes quite natural. It's just, I seem to just be positive. It's my go-to. Just this week, we finally got my daughter's specialist appointment, which we've been waiting so long for, so it was awesome. And the specialist, she said, well, the most unique thing about your daughter's case is that mother and daughter are still smiling. She said, you know, usually, she said, by this point, by the time they get to me, she said, usually it's no one's coping. Usually it's terrible. She said that this is the most unique part about this case. And you know what? It's so funny because that's not the miracle that I was believing for. You know, the miracle that I'm believing for is that should be healed. But here we are nonetheless, a miracle of being able to have joy and peace in this struggle. So I'll celebrate that miracle. But what about the days when I'm not smiling? What about the days where the positivity isn't flowing? What about the days where the fear is rising up and the doubt is rising up and any faith and any hope and any joy and any peace that I did have seems to be drowned out by the things that aren't of God, by my doubt, by my frustration? What do I do on those days? See, on those days when the darkness is rising up in me and I can't see the light of God anymore, what that makes me want to do is it makes me want to run from people. Because how can I be what I need to be for them when it's like the darkness, the things that aren't of God are rising up in me? How can I get up here, or how can I lead throughout the week when the things of God are being squashed by the things that aren't of God? What do I do in that battle? What do I do in that wrestle? Maybe you're here and you've felt like that. Maybe you're here and you feel like that. Maybe you're like, how do I actually even fully engage in a relationship? How do I fully embrace being a mother, a father, a husband, a wife, a friend? How do I fully do that with my walls down when I don't trust what's inside? When I don't even like what's inside? What do I do then? See, it's hard to step out when we don't like what's within. There's a battle going on, right and wrong, good and evil, light and darkness. But I tell you what, I am so in awe of every single person who makes something of themselves. I'm in awe of them because they don't make something of themselves without the struggle between light and darkness, but they make something of themselves with it. I'm so in awe of anybody who's successful in their family, in their marriage, with their children, successful in the workplace, in their career. I'm so in awe of you because you do so not without the struggle and the wrestle, but with it. And just like every single man and woman who has gone before you, making this world a better place with the fight between light and darkness, so can you. And especially so can you because you're not alone in this wrestle and you're not alone in this battle. I want to introduce you to Mary. Mary is very cool. So Mary lived at the same time of Jesus. Mary lived in an affluent city called Magdala, and that's actually where she got her name, Mary Magdalene. This was an affluent city on the Sea of Galilee. Now, Mary was a woman of means, and we know this from Luke chapter 8, verse 2, when she's listed as one of the women who financially supported Jesus out of her own money. She was a woman of means. But Mary was a tormented woman. The good in her was trapped. The God in her was trapped. The darkness in Mary had become so dark that she could no longer see if light even existed. It seemed like light had lost the day. She was held captive by 7 demons, is what it says in the scripture. Now, what you need to know about the number 7 is the number 7 represents completeness, which means she was completely bound by these 7 demons. And so then one day, the town of Magdala comes alive. One day, the rumors start to circulate that the one that comes to heal the sick, give sight to the blind, set the prisoners and the oppressed free is passing through. And the town comes alive. Now, we don't know if Mary fought the darkness within to go to Jesus, or we don't know if someone brought Mary to him, or we don't know if he sought her out, but what we do know is that they met. And when they met, Mary went from being possessed by 7 demons to becoming one of Jesus's disciples and to become the only person that would ever say, the first person to ever say, I have seen the Lord, he is risen, he is not dead, but he is alive. Mary achieved something the other disciples did not. She followed him all the way to the cross and all the way to the tomb. And so how did Mary do it? How did she do it? See, she was delivered from 7 demons, which means she was completely delivered, but she was not delivered from the wrestle between light and darkness. She wasn't delivered from the battle between right and wrong, because none of us are. So how is it she went in such a short space of time where the God in her was trapped, where the good in her was trapped? How did she go from that to being perhaps one of the most faithful followers of Jesus? And how do we, like Mary, engage in this battle and come out on top? If I go back to the sports analogy for a moment, when you're following a sports game, the only way to keep up with it is you say, what's the score? What's the score? Who's winning? What's the score? If I was to ask you regarding the battle that's going on inside of your soul, if I was to ask you, what's the score, would you have a clue? See, sometimes our way of coping with this wrestle between the God in us and the not God in us, sometimes is a way of coping is we pretend like it's not happening. But when we pretend like it's not happening, we can't actually see what's going on. And I think it's a really healthy thing when we would have a soul check and we would be able to go like, what's the score? Who's winning here? So that we can give attention where attention is needed. Who's winning? What's the score? Because, whether or not we are aware of it, we're either feeding one side or the other. We're either feeding the God in us or we're feeding the darkness in us. So we're feeding the darkness in us every time we choose things that are not of God. So if we feed the darkness every time we lie. We feed the darkness every time we gossip. We feed the darkness every time we judge others. We feed the darkness every time we look at what we shouldn't be looking at, every time we watch what we shouldn't be watching. You might be like, well, what is that? Where's the line? Well, if you wouldn't sit here and watch it, I don't know, with all of us, then maybe you shouldn't be watching it. When you spend more hours on the screen than breathing fresh air and with real life people, you're feeding the darkness. When you get drunk, when you cheat, when you think about all the reasons why you don't like that person and why you've been ripped off, that's feeding the darkness. And every time we engage in the things that are of God, you're feeding the things of God. So we feed the God in us when we choose self-control. We feed the God in us when we choose love. We feed the God in us when we show compassion. We feed the God in us when we're quick to forgive. We feed the God in us when we read His Word. We feed the God in us when we worship. We feed the God in us when we come to church. We feed the God in us when we're in a faith community. We feed the God in us when we are thankful. We feed the God in us when we choose hope. We feed the God in us when we choose to live by faith and not by sight. We feed the God in us. It's not complicated. We feed darkness with darkness, and we feed the things of God with the things of God. This year, and it's been so tough with Violet at school because I get called maybe 1 to 3 times a day having to go into school to help her, to change her, and that's been getting just so tough because I'm constantly living on call, having to leave work, leave meetings, drop the supermarket shopping, whatever I'm doing, I'm just on call 24/7, so there's that aspect, and then the fact that it's emotional, I don't want to be going in, I want her to be well, and so the drives to school have been really difficult, and they go one of a few ways. So that one of the ways that my drives to school to help her, it goes with me just being really annoyed, just really angry at the situation, God, why haven't you come through? It would just take a lift of your little finger. Why haven't you done it? Why are we still here? Why are we still doing this? And when I do this, I can feel the doubt in me. I can feel the fear in me begin to rise up and to strangle out any faith and any peace that was there 5 minutes ago. And I've heard people say, but Katie, God can handle your doubt. God can handle your questions. God can handle your frustration, and absolutely He can. But can my soul? See, my doubt, my frustration, my anger, any darkness that I engage in, that could never separate me from God, from His love, because of Jesus on the cross. But it can separate me from becoming who I was meant to be. It can separate me from being spiritually healthy in that moment. And I want to tell you that even when you are feeding the darkness, and when the darkness rises up in you, when all of the things that aren't of God rise up, those things can no longer separate you from God because of Jesus, which is the best news. But they can separate you from becoming who you were meant to be. And every time we do, we feed that darkness. And in that drive, if you were to ask me, Katie, what's the score? I would have to honestly tell you that I just gave a point to the other side. And there's another way to do this drive. And the other way, even when you don't feel like it, put on that worship music. Just, God, I trust you. Doesn't look great. I trust you. When I do this, I'm feeding the faith in me, not the fear. I'm feeding the hope in me. I'm feeding the peace in me, not the anxiety. I'm feeding the God in me when I choose that. And I want to tell you that every single thing you need to combat the wrestle that you are facing is already inside of you. See, we are made in God's image, which means His goodness is in your DNA. Every single thing you need to combat the darkness that is coming at you, the darkness that is rising up, is within you. It may only be in seed form, but I tell you that it's there. And I want to tell you that there is so much potential in a seed. There is so much potential in a seed. And you might be feeling more like Mary, when it looks like actually darkness has risen up so much that I feel like I can't even see the light anymore. But I want to tell you that what lay dormant in Mary when all the God in her was trapped, when all the good in her was trapped, was all the things of God, and they were in seed form. And when He delivered her from those demons, He actually called to life all of the seeds that lay dormant inside of her. And when we meet Jesus, and when we invite Jesus into that wrestle, He can call all of those things that you need back to life. They may be in seed form, which means you will have to water it, and you will have to cultivate it, and you will have to feed it, but they're all there. So what is it that you need to combat the wrestle that you're fighting? Do you need God's wisdom? It's there. It may be in seed form, but it's there. Do you need more faith? Do you need self-control to be able to actually break this habit that is holding you back? It's there. It may just be in seed form, but it's there. And you can feed it, and you can water it, and you can cultivate it, and Jesus can bring it to life. Everything you need to combat those things that aren't of God is already within you. In Philippians 4 verse 8, it says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is admirable, whatever is lovely, excellent, praiseworthy, think on such things. Why? Because when we think on them, we are watering these things and they start to grow. The God in us begins to grow. The plan, feed the side that you want to win. You feed the things of God with the things of God. And I love that all of you are here tonight in this room, because choosing this, you are feeding the things of God. You are feeding the God within you. You know, I am a soccer mum, have been for 12 years, will be for many years to come, on the sidelines doing my thing. There's this funny thing that happens when, especially in the younger teams, when one side is getting such like a whooping that the poor other little kids on the other side are just so, defeated, and they're little. The parents are always like, what do we do? And the coaches are like, what do we do? And they're like, shall we call it? It gets to a point where they stop counting. That's one of the things they do. They stop counting the goals. Because it's actually not even a game anymore, because one team is clearly, the winner, clearly superior. I want to tell you that over time, Doesn't matter how big this wrestle is. Doesn't matter how dark this darkness is. Doesn't matter how much you feel pulled to this darkness. I want to tell you that if day by day, if moment by moment, you would just choose to feed the things of God, all of a sudden, you're not even going to need to ask the question, what's the score? Because it's going to be such a whipping. It's going to be such a whipping that even if the other side gets the odd point, you already know. You already know. And this is why we need to be in a faith community. This is why we need to be in small groups, because we need to be around people that are further down the faith journey than us. Further down the journey, we need to be around people that have been watering and feeding the things of God for so long that now they're standing in victory and they don't even need to ask what's the score because they just know. And I want to tell you, if you're not in a community, if you're out there on your own and you've got all of these seeds, get into community because you need some hope. You need some faith. You need some people around you that say it's actually possible. Because I remember what it was like when I first became a Christian, when I first stepped into environments like this, and it was like I've kind of got nothing. But I had something. They were just all seed form. And I tell you, the pull into my old life, the pull into the life and to live the way that God didn't create for me, the pull to the bad and the ugly was so strong. But over time, feeding the right side, watering the right side, feeding the God in me, I mean, I kind of stand victorious right now because I don't even really feel much of a pull at all. And when it does rise up, it's like I know I've got the power of God on my side. I know the battle's already won.